Hey, isn't it interesting that on one hand, we're so focused on safety of these big companies, and on the other hand, we're still playing games like football where there's a very high possibility that you're going to get injured.
When things aren't going well, who are you? And to me, that leadership piece is a big thing because they know how important it is, but they have to walk into those situations and do some work on what they're going to present as this is how we deal with this problem here.
And you mentioned decisions, and I think you also talked about habits. Like if you're playing football and you're putting yourself in a bad position, you're going to get injured more. And maybe it's things you don't think about.
100%.
Hey, and welcome back to the Electrical Safety Podcast. I'm your host, Jon Travis, and today I'm speaking with Dan Comiskey. Dan, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, John, thanks so much for having me, man. This is it's nice to be on this side of the conversation.
Yeah, no, this is great, and we can obviously, Dan, you got your own podcast, and we can maybe chat about that a bit. But just to kind of get things going, just for our audience and people, that are listening in. It is the Electrical Safety Podcast, but we do focus, on all things safety. But usually I just like to start with, a bit of a background story, kind of how you got into where you are today. And you can go back as far as you'd like, but I know you definitely got probably some interesting things to share. So why don't you start there?
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, I guess to make it simple, I played football in the CFL for 13 years. I was doing that for about 20, made a lot of mistakes, had a lot of fun, and just kind of spending that time in different places and won a bunch of games and lost a bunch of games. And my life after football was one kind of a little bit like yours. I didn't have 8 kids, but I had 3 kids in 12 months and with the same woman. And that's all good, biggest blessing in my life. But it was one of the moments where you say, I got to figure out what I want to do next. And so I took my NCSO and started working with Shell. And I was trying to sell them a leadership program that I developed through football that I, kind of put a bunch of stuff together, stuff I still use. And they eventually just said, how about you just come out and do the one we've been doing for 30 years and we can teach you. And I thought, okay, well, that's a great experience I could have. And so my safety career really started there. I got some real personal reasons for being in safety. The biggest one, there's been a number of people affected in my life by injury and fatality, and starting with my grandpa. I mean, my great grandfather died working for Via Rail, which is crazy to know looking back because he was 48 and he had 6 kids, and my grandpa was one of them, and just thinking about what that did to his family, right? But more recently than that, my stepbrother was killed working for Ontario Hydro, and he was up in the bucket and was following a common practice, put on the wrong gloves, end of the day, and things didn't work out for him. And that kind of, when I was looking at what I wanted to do with my life after football's very, if I could say, it's just a real selfish life. Like it's great. Like if you talk to a professional football player and he ever complains, you're not talking to a very smart guy. Like it's a great way to live, right? But it's also very much about you, very much about, how you're feeling, what are you doing for you and your game? Yes, your team, but you got to get your job done, right?
Yeah.
And so I was looking for something where I could give back something of myself that was going to help people. And, through a bunch of years and work, I developed a keynote and a bunch of, leadership training and a bunch of stuff that I offer to companies. And really most of my time now is I fly around the country and I tell my brother's story and I tell my story, and I hopefully leave audiences with an understanding of how powerful they are individually and as a team. And that's I don't like to be depressing. My brother died 2001. It's a long time ago.
Yeah.
So there's no reason to try to shed tears about that or make other people do that. It was a tragedy, but it was a lesson at this point. So what I try to do is I try to bring audiences to understand how important their individual decisions are. And not only in the electrical field, obviously, but like anything you're doing where you're dealing with people and metal and construction operations and facilities, and like all these little decisions we make every day where we may be accepting something or not accepting something. All of them, we're either making the right decision or the wrong decision. And when we make a bunch of the right decisions, we're going to have a bunch of success. But making one wrong decision over and over again can create problems, right? So I try to give them some power. By the end of the time I'm up there, or any group I ever deal with, I want them to have more power than when they met me.
Yeah.
That's kind of,
No,
well, that was a long answer to a short question, buddy.
hey,
Sorry.
that's yeah. You could probably just talk the whole time about your story and we'd be good. But let's back up a few steps here, because something I've kind of thought about in the past. My boys are all playing hockey, and I'm working in safety, and so I'm always thinking like, well, and the older boys are getting into hitting hockey, so maybe not as rough as football, but they're moving pretty fast out there. So
Yeah. Maybe
I only
rougher.
yeah, and then I think about it, and I'm like, I know Hockey Canada and they're focused on player safety and things like that, but people still get injured. It's a part of the game to sometimes try to take the other guy's head off or whatever, right? And so I don't know. I guess coming out of football, where like you kind of mentioned it, like it was sort of all about you. You're focused on the individual, and then, but also just that game like isn't inherently almost designed to not injure people, but that's going to happen as part of it. I guess what I was thinking about was like when we go to the workplace, it, it it's it's almost the complete opposite to that. Like, especially for companies that are really focused on safety, almost to the point where we're not even doing anything at all that could put us in harm's way. And I mean, I don't know exactly what the question I was trying to get at here, but it's like, I don't know, just looking back, like for you, that contrast, maybe it is, what are those lessons from football that you now kind of bring to what you're doing today? Is there?
That's a fantastic question. Thank you. There's a bunch of stuff that's leadership stuff. Like there's stuff that you know, there's stuff that has to be told to leadership groups. And when you start talking about habit creation, which is something you learn in football, and you start talking about leading by example, or you start talking about understanding who your people are, and what they value. Um, but when I first came out of the game, yeah, I mean, I had had some serious concussion problems, and I mean, I played 13 years, so I think maybe I went 7 or 8 years without missing a game when I had
Mhm.
the right chiropractor back in the day, kind of thing, right? But
Yeah.
I mean, there's always something, right? And that broken arms, broken, ruptured tricep, whatever, right? But the head is the one that is everything you are, right? So for me, the thing that made me value everybody else's safety was how much peril I put myself in with a bunch of concussions I had
Hmm.
near the end of my career. In my last year, actually, I played for about 10 weeks with concussions, because I needed the money,
Yeah.
it's, you think professional sports. Well, no, it's CFL, and the contract was designed so if I missed a game, I lost half the paycheck,
Hmm.
right? And I had 3 kids, that every day they got up, they wanted to eat something. So
Yeah.
it's like, well, I guess, we're gonna figure this
Well,
out, right? And just that, when I spoke earlier about making the same decision over and over again,
yeah.
um, knowing that my stepbrother died by making the same decision over and over again until it became catastrophic, and knowing that my concussion problems, because I couldn't quit a game that I was good at, that I
Right.
loved, I didn't learn how to quit in the game, certainly, but not just quitting and stopping and evaluating, saying, "Whoa, whoa, what? Okay, so there's other I'm 38 years old. I can do
Yeah.
something else." Um,
So
that became catastrophic to my life,
I
right?
think that's it. That's exactly what I was trying to tie together. So your brain, your body, your safety is also, so in football is how that's how you're making your money. That's your livelihood. That's everything. So you might not think of it as safety, but you might think of it as, how do I make sure I don't get injured? I still have to play the game, but I can't get injured. I can't miss time, those types of things. And then that correlates to the workplace now. And workers might not have the same mindset, but they're thinking, I don't want to get injured. I don't want to miss time. But, it depends on the job too. Some people, they aren't so fortunate that they can work somewhere where if they do get injured, that it's going to be covered. Some people get injured and that's it. They're done. And so, yeah, like, were there things that you were, and so one thing you were doing is making the decision to play through a concussion, which that correlates to maybe somebody making a bad decision in the workplace.
Let's just go back to that for a second too.
Sure.
This is like pre-2000. This is like 2010.
Yeah.
So a lot of stuff has happened since then. Like there were just breaking news with what concussions really were.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I've always been a bit of a disbeliever about bad news. Like probably to my own,
Yeah.
my own, to create some problems in my own life. But yeah, so yeah, making that decision. Sorry, keep going. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's good.
It was the decision, right? That was the
Yeah.
decision.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
there's I mean, it's the same with safety too, as we learn more things about whatever these hazards are or stuff like that, then you can hopefully make better decisions. It's just, I guess I was always had this thought where I was like, hey, isn't it interesting that on one hand, we're so focused on safety of these big companies, and on the other hand, we're still playing games like football where there's a very high possibility that you're going to get injured. Maybe not a fatality, but I'm sure somewhere in the world this probably happened before. And so yeah, so I guess, like, maybe you didn't even think about it as safety back then, but like, what were the things that you were doing? And you mentioned decisions, and I think you also talk about habits. Like, if you're playing football and you're putting yourself in a bad position, you're going to get injured more. And maybe it's things you don't think about.
100%.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And yeah, so I just, maybe if you can, is there, how do you correlate that back then to maybe what you're doing now? And maybe it is with that decision making or habits, and maybe you can speak on that a little bit more.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So most sports, but football specifically, is like a habit creation machine, right? They film every step you take. Every step that's live in a game is 100. You have to go 100%. Like you can't. The first way you're going to get hurt is by not giving it, like not literally going as hard as you can. That might be, a screenplay where you're setting up slow. It might, but you're on 100% every second, right? So the first thing you learn in football is that if you're going to make a mistake, make it big, right? Like just make sure you're hitting somebody when you make it, right?
Mhm.
That's kind of how it goes. But there's little things like, when you were talking, one of the things that came to my mind is offensive linemen always hurt their shoulders when they start putting their arms out here, right? When they put their arms out, what happens is these guys you're playing against are just as big as you, right? And that's just a lot of, so you learn early to keep everything inside. And it's just so like that, just that little habit, that's just you're protecting yourself, right? But it's like every habit and every way your body is leaning, so it's your footwork for every play, your hand placement for every play is designed for you to be successful. So if you're actually on top of your game with your body position, with your footwork, with your hand placement, with your equipment being on properly, which is more important than people believe, as well as with the playbook, as an offense or defensive line, it doesn't matter, anybody in the field, your likelihood of getting injured is less as long as you're going all out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But whenever it's when you lose or get hurt, usually, not always, it's because you're out of place. Now that being said, yeah, I got one concussion because I was part of a play where, a bunch of guys ended up on the ground. There's really no way to stop that. I got kicked in
Mhm.
the back of the head by a guy running over top of me, right? Well, you're not, I mean, some of this stuff is just going to happen.
Mhm.
And that's the difference between real life is that we really, yes, some things can happen because there's going to be weather change. There's going to be other people come into your site. There's going to be, things are going to be, as well as I do, man. Like there are a lot of variables in the
Yeah.
world that affect a workplace. But as long as you're doing what you're supposed to be doing and you know what you're supposed to be doing, which means the young guys get mentored and the old guys coach and all that is, your likelihood of getting hurt can be reduced, you know, I mean, at least significantly. Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm not a guy that I used to preach the goal zero message and I'm just not that guy. I think there's a savior complex that where we think that we can, like everybody can be saved, but kind of reminds me of back in the day being on a team that's horrendous, losing, and week 10 going into the playoffs and you've lost 9 games, or sorry, week 10 going to the end of the season, you've lost 9 games. You get a head coach that stands up there and says, "No, we're going to win the Grey Cup." No, you're
Yeah.
not, man. Like you're just not, you're lying, right? Things are going to go wrong. How do you deal with that? Right.
Mhm.
I'm not saying it's okay to send people home hurt. I'm not saying it's okay that worse things happen, but we have to realize that this is still the world. Does
Right.
that make sense?
Yeah.
I know
No,
maybe
I
I
mean,
went way too far with that answer, but I kinda just
no, I
started
mean,
talking.
and that might just kinda open up something else because you mentioned well, I mean, there's something that I've, um, struggled with, certain companies will have a slogan like, "Safety's number one," which sounds great, and not exactly what you were saying with the 0 incident goal, um, but it's sort of these things that people, they put it on a big poster and they stick it up there and they say, "That's the great thing," and from my experience, that's not no one, used to tell the truth or that guy's lying. It's like everyone's lying when they say that because running their business is probably number one,
Yep,
right? And then safety has to be like if you had four pillars holding this thing up, safety has to be one of those pillars, right? But it's if you put it first, then just no one would do anything. No one would come to work because safety's number one. So we can't even get in the car and risk driving to work that day.
that's
Right?
right.
It makes no sense.
Well, then
So
there's huge issues like, my ex-father-in-law was a miner, and they're saying safety's number 1, safety first, and then they pay him by the inch,
mm,
So every inch he digs, he gets paid more. Well, is safety number 1 or is depth number 1?
right.
It's like they're dumb, just because 'cause they're the ones that are slugging it out down there in the mine. That there's probably a lot of things going on in their brains, right? Like
Yeah.
they're thinking about things.
Yeah.
And they're looking for that hypocrisy as far as I'm
Yeah.
concerned, you know?
Yeah. And so it's it's one of these things that, obviously when and this is kind of something I've struggled with as well. Not personally, but just when I'm speaking with different organizations and customers and that. It's it's kind of like a double-edged sword. On one side, they're very focused on the liability aspect. So we have to have our safety policy in place because we we don't want to get sued or we don't want to be legally accountable. And then on the other side of that is also, well, some of these people are my friends and I know them quite well, and that wouldn't be good if there was a fatality that would um probably as the size of the company grows, the further it leans on the other side of the liability thing, and um, depends on who's actually at the top of the organization. Um, but so back to your comment on the, you know, you're not necessarily a believer in that zero incident mentality. I guess what is it that you do believe, or what do you think is realistic, or what is an approach that people should be taking to tackle safety or to think about it?
That's an awesome question. I think it's more of a human performance thing. I think we've gotta look at this, you know, um, and again, like I'm not minimizing the importance of keeping everybody safe. It's
Mhm.
my whole career is based on, like we were talking earlier, like it's like, it's based on keeping people safe and spreading that message. But um that being said, we're dealing with humans and we're dealing with a world with uncertainties. And we know that people are going to make mistakes. And so the question is, how do we help them to not make mistakes?
Mhm.
Number one, how do we help them learn from their mistakes? How do we deal with people when a mistake has been made? And I'm not talking about a malicious mistake. Like malicious mistakes are not mistakes, right? If somebody does something on purpose, it's continual. There's some people you got to cut. I'm a
Mhm.
football player. Some people you have to launch and go somewhere else.
Yeah.
But the challenge is, it's like my buddy Don McGregor says, I'm not going to send somebody to another site to die there. And he started believing that because he had to intervene on a guy for not wearing fall arrest. So he intervened on him. So meaning he went and had a conversation with him and he started talking about his personal life. He started trying to get to know him. And this guy, he ended up, I just want you to commit to me, just between you and me. You're going to always wear this stuff. And the guy ended up wearing fall arrest. And the next week, Don was on site working, and doesn't he fall? He's 60 meters in the air,
Mhm.
and he's saved. And Don's the one that pulls him in, from the railing. And he's like, he could have sent him away to make that same mistake for another company,
Wow.
and then he could be dead. Right? It's like, so there's a whole thing there. Like it's not just, we went through the golden rules era, right? Where you just get fired if you don't follow the rules. Well,
Right.
you're not coaching them, and you're now sending them away to go die somewhere else,
Yeah.
right? So a lot of companies have evolved through that. It's because, well, now we're not doing that. But I think we're getting into this new era where it's really human performance. And I think we've got to talk about, why are we making mistakes? What is a friend of mine, who I'm partner with on a couple things. He has a system, and he calls it chatter. What is the chatter going on in your brain that's keeping you from being focused on what you're doing? And how do you deal with that chatter?
Mm.
Right. I mean, now that's a very, very, you're talking, that's the beginning square. And then how do you do that with a whole industry, or a whole, like a whole site even, right?
Yeah.
But it's a big challenge. And I think the first step is there. We all agree that, I don't want to have my brother or my wife or my friend die at site.
Mhm.
That's not what I want. Or my friend's wife, or somebody I'm working with. A good friend of mine's a safety advisor, and he dealt with a double fatality on his site, and he had to go tell the wife, who he also had dinner with.
Mhm.
Like they also went and had dinner at this guy's house, right? Like that's how serious it is.
Yeah.
So we know that, right? But let's not throw a blanket statement on and say, no, 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 we just don't get hurt here, right?
Right.
That's like, it's like saying, as an offensive lineman, no, linemen just don't get injured. We just don't get injured.
Mhm.
No, you play with injury, right? Different animal,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, so it's kinda coming from that, because this is what I've seen, like, just specifically in the electrical space. Um, you've got some very good standards out there now that are workplace electrical safety rules, for lack of a better term. And they're written really well. Most companies are able to figure them out and put them in place on paper. And what I am seeing though is that human link that's missing still. So you mentioned leadership earlier. You just mentioned human performance. Um, and actually, it's something that we started kind of thinking about and getting into is when it comes to training, is trying to figure out not how to train people on knowledge and memorization and answering the questions at the end of the test, but how to help them with their decision-making process and how to recognize when they're making an assumption that they shouldn't be making and things like that. So, what are some of those techniques that maybe you would encourage people to use to help to s- to start to teach people about human performance or decision making, or what are some of the things that you use, tactics, tools that you might use or promote for that?
That's awesome. That's a great question. Thank you. I think number one, mindfulness. And I know it sounds like, I mean, I don't think as old as I am, but I mean, when I was a kid, there was I think you're old enough to remember this. We were pretty much mindful all the time because there was nothing to distract us, right? If you're going for a family drive, you're looking out the window, there's no phones, there's no TVs, there's no nothing, right? Um, I think that that's something we've lost. And if, to me, it's when I get into habits, um, part of it is understanding what your baseline should be when you're going to work. And I do this for keynotes, or I do this for training.
Mm-hmm.
Um, anytime I'm really out there functioning with groups. So it's, you start the day with, for me, it's a lot of prayer, but it could be just said mindful. It's understanding where you're starting, right? So that you know, okay, I'm going to work. Maybe I'm working for a hydro company. I'm going to work, but you know what? Like last night, I got in a huge fight with my wife, and all I can think about is the thing she said to me last night that broke my heart. Well,
Mm-hmm.
where are you on the course of, am I protecting myself and my workmates?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So what does that look like? And then, so what is your system? And there's breathing techniques you can use. For me, yeah, that for me, a lot of it's I just call it a reboot. And the way we train it, it's a breathing technique, and you do some deep breathing, and you take a minute and you say, okay, well, what are the things I have to concentrate on to keep myself going right here and keep myself alive?
Right.
But when I was teaching my daughter how to drive, and she'd, hit a curb or something, and she'd get anxious. Okay, well, listen, you got to reboot, right? Because you're still driving.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you must tell one of your kids how to drive already. If they're eight, you've got
Well,
eight of them.
one of them he's getting going now. Yeah. Just turned
Yeah,
2.
so it's like, what you better reboot and know what what's your center point, right? That would be the first one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I mean, in terms of leaders, it's always leaders you're talking to, right? In terms of leaders, it's it's you have to understand that everything you do in front of anybody and every paper you ever sign, you're leading by example. So either you're doing something right or you're doing something wrong, and everybody's going to evaluate.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of pressure, right? So that reaction when somebody makes a mistake, or that reaction when things aren't going the way you want them to be going, maybe production, we're not hitting a production, target, something's going wrong. That reaction is what you're most known for. You're not known for what it's like to win with you, right?
Yeah.
I was on a team once where we were 13-2, and I was talking to one of my buddies. I'm like, it's amazing. Like, there's no fights on this team. Like, there's no arguments.
Yeah.
And my buddy's like, yeah, you're just young. It's because if we lost 5 games, there'd be a lot of fights on this team,
Yeah.
right? When things aren't going well, who are you? And to me, that leadership piece is a big thing, because they know how important it is, but they have to walk into those situations and do some work on what they're going to present as this is how we deal with this problem here,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so it kind of, to me, it meets in the middle, you know. But you're also talking about a lot, mainly men, and training men to be mindful in today's day and age. Like it's not a one-off 45-minute session.
No,
Like,
yeah, that was the thought. I guess it's being mindful or aware of what's going on in your surroundings, but it's also your values. And if you don't value safety, then you're not going to be thinking about it, right? So even as a leader, if you're the guy who's, hey, we're getting paid by the inch here, like you mentioned before, then maybe that's what you're going to be mindful of. So it's also positioning your own thoughts to understand what is actually important, and that, because when the rubber hits the road, if safety's top of your list or close to the top, that's what's going to come out of your mouth. When you have to make a decision, you have to say, no, this is what we're going to do. If that person doesn't truly believe in it, then what they're going to do is probably not going to be the safe thing. But no, that's really good.
you're right if it doesn't come from the top. I spent a bunch of years working for Shell. I think I mentioned earlier, and safety reported to safety,
Mm,
and that's just the way it was. And safety went all the way up to the president's office, and that's how. And so there was no question about what the leadership valued. I mean, there's arguments about this guy or that guy, right? But there was no question. And I learned a really valuable lesson because I'm a young safety advisor, and I shut down these guys on a skyjack. I'm like, you guys get down here. There's
mhm.
the wind's blowing above outside of manufacturer specs, so they're chancing somebody going to fall, right?
Yep.
And so I shut him down and I left. And you guys can't do that till the wind calms down. And I get a call from the on-site rep, and his name was Eugene. He's just an old roughneck man, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, old Dutch dude, and he just, like just looked like, a miner from the 40s kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? Like real tough. And he said, "Well, that's great. You shut down my site." He said, "But are you going to help us?" Well, my job is to make sure everybody's safe. No, your job is to help us get the work done. I believe in safety, but
Mhm.
you should be out there with them with a wind gauge until it's okay, until you can approve them to go back up.
Right.
It's like, oh, and then the next step is you should know how to present that before the windstorm. You should know so it's like, how do you keep people working,
Right.
right? How do you
Yeah.
keep them working and safe?
That's
You
a
know?
great that's a great way to look at it. I haven't heard that before. That makes a lot of sense. And that's a lot of and for a lot of people that are in safety, they probably could hear that message because I don't think they understand that actually. Um, some of them might, but a lot of them might have that or I'm here to shut this down mentality, a little bit of a power trip. And they went into it thinking, no, I'm here to keep things moving as safely as possible. That might help everybody out. Um,
Thank you.
I think if you don't mind, I think given the audience as well, if you could take a moment to share a little bit more details on your brother's story, and
Yeah, yeah,
as much as you'd feel comfortable with, and even from your point of view or from what you've kind of the lesson that you kind of get out of that, or just because I think it would really help this audience.
thank you. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So Augie was young 40s, and it was 2001, and he'd been with a hydro company, Ontario here, for about 20 years. And he'd been, he was a linesman, and just a great guy, like just a
Mm,
sweet, nice, always was the guy that bought me a Christmas present. I never bought him one back, kind of thing. Like, I mean, you know what I mean? Like, he was too good for me personally. Like, he's just a
mhm,
nice guy. Right. And, and yeah, it was St. Catherine's summer, August 21st, 2001. End of the day, their common practice was to switch out of their double insulated gloves and put on dry leather gloves. They seemed that there was the belief that there was no risk there,
mhm,
and or little risk, little enough, so that when they cleaned up, they could just be up in the bucket. And so he was tidying up and cleaning up, and he used to keep candy in his bucket. And then when kids would pass by, because he's municipal, he'd throw them candy, like I said, just a sweet guy, right?
yeah,
And so he had changed out of his insulated gloves and put on leather gloves. But if you've ever been in St. Catharines in August, it's like you're swimming in air, right? Like it's just so humid, right?
mhm,
And so you can just imagine, these leather gloves, and they would just get damp and they would get wet. So he's working along, and this kid was crossing the lawn, and he threw her some candy, and he lost his balance. He grabbed the wrong wire, and it stopped his heart.
hmm,
It wasn't a super huge, it wasn't a huge voltage he got, but it was enough.
yeah,
Um, and his best friend was working in the bucket with him, and he, bravely at the time ripped him off the wire. And he's still alive, part of the family. Obviously people that we love. Um, but it changed me for a bunch of reasons. Number one, I don't mean to be too emotional about it, but number one is hearing his dad cry. His dad, my stepdad, who I
yeah,
adore. That's a hard, probably the toughest guy I've ever met. 17-year career soldier, was in places I've never been and did things I've never done, and hearing him weak. It's the only time I've ever seen him weak. And if you call that weak,
Mm-hmm.
but a part of it was really like, what's with the common practice of changing gloves, and it got into my head, right? Because you start thinking about how many people could actually have influenced him in a way to change that mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's so a lot of it for me is like how many guys in the company knew that that was a common practice, right? Was it 100? And of all of them, would they all know that you could die? Like, I
Right.
would think that if you're in the bucket, you know that that could kill you, right? Like, you understand electricity. These guys know more about it than I'll ever know.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, if it was 100 guys, and it's probably a light number, if it was 100 guys, though, then every day they had the decision of not doing anything about that common practice.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lack of ability to decide to do something, or it's a decision to not do it. And it doesn't matter which one it is, because you realize that that's a decision every day. And so I started adding numbers up, and I'm not real good at math, John,
Mm-hmm.
but like, 300 working days a year makes it 30,000 decisions not to save my brother. And no one would ever, I'm not trying to villainize anybody.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not. I've made the risky decisions. I've done the stupid things. I've done them with people. I've directed. Believe me, I'm preaching to myself here, but it's like, how often do you have the opportunity? And again, I'm not talking about changing his whole life. I'm not talking about changing his religion. I'm talking about, like, if your life is a book, and on the page of the book where you're putting those leather gloves on, if it's a little earmark that just affects him and influences him, he only had to not do it once.
Mm.
Right. And it's like, there's all those opportunities. And to me, that's part of our power, is that we can save people without even knowing we're saving them. Right. It's how God made us. Like,
Mm.
this whole system, this whole process is about, we splash our decisions into the world, and they domino out into the rest of the world, and they help people, and they save people, and they do things. And when you're at work, intervening on an unsafe act or an unsafe condition is a huge splash of dominoes, right? And it's just, you don't know who you're saving, right? You don't know whose kid you're saving. It could be yours. So it like that. When Augie died, it took me a long time to really understand all of that,
Mm-hmm.
but it put me in safety. It just put me in, okay, that seems like something that I need to know more about. I need to talk about. And then, so then when I went for my NCSO, he was in my mind. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, I hope I honor him when I talk about him. I hope I'm doing a good enough job. Like I say, I can't, he's a great guy,
Yeah.
and he could just be a guy that has kids and grandkids now, you know, and,
Yeah.
and
Well, I
it's,
mean, no, thanks for sharing that. And that, that story, it, it already is probably having a domino effect, and it's going to continue to have a domino effect. So, there might be a part of that, hopefully you can touch however many lives you have no idea
I hope so.
through him.
Thank you. I
And,
hope so.
maybe that's a great place to end it off. I want to thank you again for coming on the show. It's a fantastic story. Maybe just you can, tell us about your podcast, and people can check that out as well.
Yeah. Love to. I'm not as organized as you, John. I try my best, but you've got this thing down. You look good.
Oh,
You sound good. My podcast is called the Bridge Podcast, and I go in different directions with it. I talk about a lot about safety and leadership. Sometimes I'm interviewing people that I've known for a long time. Sometimes I'm interviewing people I find to talk about the things I don't know. I have a favorite segment. I say what are your favorite 3 rules? So they can give me 3 rules. It's amazing how different the rules are and how valuable they are
yeah.
all. So maybe there's a book in that for somebody, not me. I don't write anymore. But I'll get talking about God. I was saved 3 years ago. We had chat about this. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here. And
Mhm.
I've been blessed my whole life, and especially, since I now know him. And sometimes I'll bring on some old guys from the CFL, and we'll talk sports.
Cool.
That's usually just for giggles. So yeah, I have a lot of fun with it. Really just trying to bring some positive stuff to online entertainment, and maybe part of it's just entertaining myself. So we'll
No,
see how it goes.
great. So what we'll do, we'll link to that. We'll also link to your website so people could kind of check you out and see if they want to bring you on. I know you do keynote speaking and things like that. So
Awesome.
make sure. And yeah, once again, thanks so much for coming on the show. It was great. I think people are going to learn a lot. And yeah, thanks.